of Tabernacle as one Sukkot. And you can see why this season is so special to the Jewish people, because we have the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Atonement, which is the critical holiday for all people. It's the foundation for Yeshua's sacrifice. And now we come to the final holiday of the season called Sukkot. This holiday, which we've just read about in the Bible texts, I'm going to speak about today, as I introduced, just like I introduced Rosh Hashanah before we celebrated it, and Yom Kippur before we observed it. I want to introduce Sukkot to you before we encounter it tomorrow night. So some of you who don't know anything about it will be prepared, and those of you who do know something about Sukkot will be reminded of what we're doing here. So today's message is going to be really just on Sukkot. There are two primary purposes for the celebration of this holiday. We just read them from Leviticus 23, but let me point out to you that the best reason for Sukkot is it's like a Thanksgiving. We get to eat. It's a harvest festival, and we get to eat all the bounty that the Lord gave us during the year. I'm thinking ancient Israel at the moment, okay, not modern day, because I know they're not supposed to eat too much because of paleo this or whatever. So, but forgetting diets for a second, theoretically, just think back to the days of Israel. It was a great spectacle. It was a wonderful day. Everybody brought their crops into, and their fruit and vegetables into the city and celebrated. And guess what? The founders of the United States of America, the Puritans, actually modeled Thanksgiving on Sukkot. Some people say. So maybe the date is not the same, but the concept is that we celebrate God's bounty. Every time we thank God for our food, we should be celebrating that God provides for us, right? We forget. We take it for granted. But if we could learn how to show thanksgiving for every blessing God gives us, like a bagel, I'm just being practical here for a moment. It would help us relate to our Father in heaven. He wants to bless us with bounty. So the first meaning then of Sukkot is to celebrate a Thanksgiving. But the second meaning also is important, and it's specified in Leviticus 23, that we would be reminded to dwell in booths now like our ancestors did thousands of years ago. The word booth is a sukkah. The word Sukkot is two booths, a plural. So you hear both of those words. We know that the Torah teaches that God dwelt with our people for 40 years in the wilderness, like a extended camping trip. I mean, we're out there in the wilderness, and you're going to learn some things tomorrow night from another video we're going to watch, how surprising it was. Remember, the people of Israel were delivered from bondage, right? And what kind of provisions did they take with them? All kind of dried food? And no, they took matzah, unleavened bread. That was it. And they didn't have that much for 40 years. So this whole deliverance thing is pretty important, and very important to understand that since God watched over our people for 40 years in the wilderness, which I believe did happen miraculously, we can count on God to watch over us, because we are His children today. Jew or non-Jew, we are His children today, and He's going to watch over us and look after us. So with these kind of celebratory themes, this holiday called Sukkot was given another name, the time of our rejoicing. The time of our rejoicing. Because we're celebrating that God lived with us for this wilderness experience. Now, I want to tell you about some of the traditional aspects of Jewish observance of Sukkot. These are related to what's in the Bible, but not totally in the Bible. But that's okay, because we embellish things to make them more meaningful, and that's fine as long as we keep in line with the Scripture. Our people were instructed to live in booths, or Sukkot, for the whole period of this holiday, which is 8 days long, to celebrate God's provision. It's supposed to be so joyful that a lot of traditional Jews don't even wait till the day begins to start building their sukkahs, their booths. We will start building our sukkah tomorrow morning at 10:30, I think, on 11 o'clock at the corner of the parking lot, the northwest corner of the parking lot right in front where we did it last year. I know a number of you are involved in this process. Those of you are construction oriented, which is good. Thank God Jason is the general manager of this big project because he knows what he's doing. Thank God I'm not. And but some start right away. The day after Yom Kippur is over, some get out there and start building their booths. But we had to wait, which is fine. So we're going to be putting up our sukkah tomorrow afternoon, and I hope you come and join. If you talk to Jason and needs extra help, and then the children are going to be decorating our sukkah for us. They're working on it now downstairs, and there's other stuff left over from previous years. We want it to be a celebration. We want to have fun. Now think about that. How many Jewish holidays are about having fun? Purim and Sukkot. We're called to celebrate, so we have to get in the celebratory frame of mind. Begin now. So now let's talk about the sukkah itself so you have some understanding of what's happening, because I'm going to encourage you to actually go out in the sukkah, and tomorrow night we're going to do that and have some eating. We're going to eat in the sukkah tomorrow night. Now the Bible doesn't give a big description about what the sukkah should look like, but over time we've developed some customs and traditions, so around the world sukkahs have a lot of similarities. They're supposed to be a temporary hut. They're not to last long. They last maybe a week, and then they're taken down. They're temporary. In the sukkahs that we've had up in the past, they're really temporary because they don't sometimes last a week. The one that I oversaw lasted about half a day and collapsed. But with Jason, we're going to have a good sukkah that's still temporary, even though it's not going to fall down on anybody this time. Okay, it's still temporary. We're not going to make it into the concrete. We're fine. So it's to be a temporary hut, and we're supposed to eat some meals in it. And it has to be sort of flimsy, but not rickety. So we don't want to feel this permanent. We don't want to go into the hut and say, oh, this is permanent, but let's move in. Not going to feel like that. It should have at least 3 walls. And if you think back to Abraham, you remember Abraham showed great hospitality to people who are wanderers. And his tent had 3 sides. One side was always open to encourage guests to stop by, and he would feed them and wash their feet, which was an ancient custom in the Middle East, and give them something to eat. It was his nature. And you remember he one time invited 3 men, in quotation marks, didn't dine with them. Turned out they were angels. They were literally angels. And don't ask me how that happens, but they were some sort of spiritual being that appeared as a human being, kind of like Yeshua. So anyway, he had 3 walls on his tent, and that's one of the reasons we have 3 walls on the sukkah. But what about the roof? Maybe we should get some nice tiles to keep the rain out, nice construction tiles, or beautiful, maybe get some tiles from Mexico that are really colorful, and close the roof in. No! The roof is supposed to have holes in it. In fact, when we build the sukkah tomorrow, you'll see we're going to be using something called skach. Who knows what skach is? I know none of you know what skach is. Skach is related to the word Sukkot, the Hebrew word Sukkot, and skach is what you put on the top of your sukkah, that anything that grows from the ground. You can use corn stalks, you can use 2x4s, you can use bushes and tree branches. Anything that grows from the ground is considered to be skach, and it goes on your roof. And the roof is arranged in such a way that when you look up, you get to see stars in the night, and in the daytime you get to see God's heavens. We want the sense that we're under God's watch, not our own own devices to make a roof that won't leak. This is a time that if you go out there during the rain, you're going to get wet. Sorry, folks. It's the way it is. So we want to have a roof that's kind of like holy, if you will. I don't mean H-O-L-Y, but W-H. How do you spell it? H-O-L-E-Y, holy, so that we can see the sky. And we're going to do that, right, Jason? You're not going to put up some fancy roof with tiles and shingles, right? Okay, good. Whew. Palm branches are big in the Middle East for skach because they're so prevalent. And what we're going to see is the children are going to decorate our sukkahs with strings and lights. It's going to be a beautiful time. And truly, if you are so inclined and the weather is nice, you may sleep in the sukkah if you want, but we take no legal responsibility for what happens to you. I want to make that clear. It's on tape. You know, if you want to sleep in the sukkah or spend an hour in the sukkah in prayer, feel free to do that. It's there for you. We've actually invited the congregations that meet at the gathering place to all participate if they should want to. I don't encourage sleeping outside like that, but, you know, if you're zealous, you might want to do it. In Israel, people actually sleep in their sukkah for 7 days. They move out of their homes and live in the sukkah. They're much nicer than what we have out there. They're not necessarily sturdier, but they're a little bit more comfortable because they're going to spend a whole week out there. And so, they bring in some food and stuff like that. So you can spend a whole day. The idea is to commune with God and remember He's watching over us at all times. So in Israel, you'll see pictures of this, and maybe we'll have some for you tomorrow night, that a lot of the Israelis put sukkahs on their back decks, their back porches, and they're beautiful to see, beautiful to see. So we eat our meals in the sukkah, and then tomorrow night we're going to come at 6 o'clock for eating our meal together. We're having some sort of a potluck, and then we'll eat out in the sukkah. You'll take a plate of food, go out in the sukkah. There's going to be tables set up, and you can enjoy eating food under God's watch care. Now, this is an 8-day festival in which we have a ceremony that you're going to see tomorrow night where we wave the lulav. The lulav is a palm branch, and we hold it together with some other vegetation from Israel and a citron, which is a lemon called an etrog. And we'll go over this. We'll wave these fruits together. This was done in ancient times, and we still do it now. And they're wrapped together, and they symbolize God's harvest and God's omnipresence over the world. You'll see us do this tomorrow night. And if you have purchased your own lulav set, have any of you done that? We ordered a bunch. Did anybody talk to Tanya about ordering one from you? Well, talk to her. You can still get one. I think so. We'll go through a ceremony that observes that. Now, I want to make a point here. I love Jewish tradition. I'm Jewish. The traditions are part of my history, part of my life, part of my family. But I'm also very interested in the spiritual aspects of all of our traditions and our holidays. So let me share a couple of thoughts with you from Sukkot in the Brit Hadashah, Sukkot in the New Testament. Maybe you didn't know that Sukkot is in the New Testament. It is. It's significant, too. There are a lot of very important lessons taught in the New Testament about Sukkot. You might remember the first verse of the Good News according to Yochanan, or John. You know that the Word became a human being and lived with us. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word dwelt among us. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Guess what? That's all part of the Sukkah theme, God dwelling with our people. So here, John, the gospel writer, sees the birth of Yeshua, and he's writing about it, and he says, like God dwelled with our ancestors in the wilderness, so too Yeshua is God incarnate, dwelling with us now. So as John related the special background of Messiah, he openly declares Yeshua's deity in these first verses of John. The Word was not only with God in the beginning, but this Word is the very manifestation of God Himself. And this word, I'm going to talk to you about this another time, this concept of word in the first verses of John has great meaning. It was a commonly used expression in the Jewish world. And I'll fill you in on that another time. I don't have time in this talk. You'll like what you're hearing. So the Word became a human being and lived with us, and we saw His Shekinah, or Shekinah. Christians say Shekinah glory. It's Shekinah, and the Shekinah of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John 1:14. So John is connecting Yeshua's birth with Sukkot. But it's more than that. John uses the metaphor related to dwelling with the people to describe the incarnation of Yeshua. And to the Jewish people that heard him, it would have made a lot of sense. In fact, the Greek word for dwelt with his people is skine, and it also comes from the root word for Sukkot. So he's tying very deliberately into tabernacles here. Now, let's talk about a few other things here that you might find interesting. Do you know that many scholars, many Christian scholars don't believe that Yeshua was born on December 25th? How many of you know that? I mean, I'm sure you've all heard this. You know, and then people say, well, it doesn't matter when he was born. What matters is that he was born, and let's remember the reason for the season. You know, we all want to appreciate the birth of the Messiah. Well, I think we can appreciate the birth of the Messiah if we understood that he was probably born on the first day of Sukkot. Now, people dispute that, but I'm going to share a couple ideas with you as to why I think that, and many scholars do. Does that mean we're going to celebrate the Christmas holiday on the first day of Sukkot? I don't want to do that. I think December is a fine time to celebrate and have presents and songs and all that sort of stuff. But I think we need to remember that because the Bible uses the biblical holidays to teach about God's prophetic plan in history, we have to say, well, maybe there's something in the holiday called Sukkot that we should take into consideration. And there is. There is. The Western Church, the Catholic Church, since about the 4th century of the Common Era, 4th century AD, adopted December 25th as the official date to acknowledge the incarnation of the Messiah. However, most historians admit that this was really done in concession to the pagans of the Roman Empire than to the Holy Scriptures. As is often the case in early church history, the church leaders said, well, there's a nice pagan holiday. Let's Christianize it. Let's make it kosher somehow. So they took some things and they distorted them to kind of bring them into, I think there was good reason for doing this, because they didn't want their people to practice paganism. So they took these popular pagan customs and Christianized them. And I think that's what happened with December 25th. They Christianized existing pagan days. December 25th is the day, the ancient festival of the winter solstice, when the sun is returning to the sky. December 25th is the day that there's a turning point in the calendar. And it had nothing to do with the birth of Yeshua, but it was a pagan celebration, because the pagans loved to worship the natural world. So here comes the sun gets smaller and smaller, and now it's coming back up and it's getting bigger and bigger. So wow, let's have a celebration. And the pagans celebrated in ways we don't want to know about. So the Christian leaders said, well, let's make this kosher somehow. Let's Christianize it. And that's what happened. That's what a lot of people think, where they got December 25th as the day that Yeshua was born. I disagree with that. One of the reasons is that God's plan of salvation from each of the holidays that you'll find neatly packaged in Leviticus 23. It summarizes all the holidays nice and neat in the package. And you'll see that if you look at them, they are talking about the world of prophecy. Passover, It was a prophetic picture of the sacrifice of the Messiah, right? Feast of First Fruits, Shavuot, comes 50 days later, celebrates the birthday, what some people say the birthday of the church on Pentecost. Did you know Pentecost was a Jewish holiday? All right. So there's a plan given by God in his Torah of what's going to come down the road. And I think that literally Messiah's birth on Tabernacles makes a lot of sense. But there's more than that. There's chronological calculations that lead to a birth of Messiah in the late fall rather than December. Now, here's why. And again, I don't want to spend a lot of time debating this because there are different points of view. I just want to present these ideas to you to consider, and maybe we'll talk about it another time. Most people know that Yeshua's earthly ministry lasted for 3.5 years. That's fairly accepted. And we know that he died during the Passover season, right? So if he died in the Passover season and you work back 3.5 years, that would mean, if you calculated it, that his birth would have taken place in Sukkot. That's according to A.T. Robertson in a book called A Harmony of the Gospels. That's a Christian theologian who came up with that conclusion. Here's another thought. There's quite an inconsistency. A lot of the nice Christian Christmas songs I really like the shepherds in the field and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's beautiful songs. They're wonderful. But there were no shepherds in the field during that period of time because there were no sheep in the field. The sheep were all in their sheepfolds because they were brought in around November and they stayed indoors till February. The sheep could not wander out because it gets cold. Now, on our tour, some of you are going on the tour with us, that's early December. It won't be terribly cold, but it won't be, real warm. It's December, maybe in the 50s. But more in Israel, especially the higher elevations, it got very cold. So the sheep were actually brought in during the dead of winter. And that's stated in Adam Clark's commentary on Luke. A final clue about this has to do with housing. Have you ever heard that there was no room at the inn? What kind of, how could that be? Why was it so crowded? Do you think people were taking vacations in December? They were leaving the north and the south, coming from all over the world to vacation in Israel during the month of December because it was so nice and temperate. It was unpleasant and cold. It's a terrible idea to think that all the Jews came to Jerusalem during December to celebrate anything. Why would they do that? Well, the reason the Jews came to Jerusalem or Bethlehem in the first place was the Romans did their census at that time. And the Romans wanted all the people to be counted because they could tax them. It was a head tax. They taxed all the Jews that came, and they wanted all of them to be there, so they did their census during times when there would be a lot of Jews in town, like Sukkot. Sukkot is one of the 3 pilgrim holidays. Passover, Shavuot, or Pentecost, and Sukkot are the 3 times a year all the Jews were instructed by the Torah, by God, to come to Jerusalem. So that's probably why the Roman governing authorities did their taxing at that time so that they could count a lot of people. That's why there was no room at the inn. It was the fall. It was Sukkot. All the Jews were in town to be taxed by the Romans. It wasn't December. Just a thought. There would be no logic for the Romans to tell the Jews to come to Jerusalem in December. A lot of them said, no, it's too cold. We go to Miami. So it sort of makes sense that the birth of Yeshua did not take place in December, but it's very logical that it took place on Sukkot. So let me read a few more things to you that I think you'd find interesting. This morning I had several selections read that related to Sukkot from the Torah, and also from Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah, and also some from the Brit Hadashah, the New Covenant. In John chapter 7, we read these words. Now on the last day of the festival, Hoshana Rabbah, that's what it's called, the last day, the seventh day of the festival of Sukkot. Hoshana Rabbah means the big celebration. It says, Yeshua stood and cried out, if anyone is thirsty, let him keep coming to me and drinking. Whoever puts his trust in me, as the scripture says, rivers of living water will flow from his inmost being. Now he said this about the Spirit, whom those who trusted in him were to receive later. The Spirit had not yet been given because Yeshua had not yet been glorified. John 7, 37 through 39, which we heard read this morning. So picture this. This is the seventh day of the Feast of Sukkot. What's been happening? Every day of Sukkot, day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the priests and the people would walk around the temple one time. And they would be celebrating. Remember, it's party city, it's party time. On the seventh day, the Hoshana Rabbah, the great day of celebration, 7 times around the temple. And a lot of noise, a lot of celebrating. In fact, the high priest would go down to the pool of Siloam, which is literally down the hill from the temple. Literally, you walk down the hill. It's not a big walk, just down the hill. I've walked up a few times, so it's not too big. And they would get water from the pool of Siloam, which you know that from biblical stories. And they would carry this water up to the temple. And on the final day, Hoshana Rabbah, they would pour water all over the temple altar. Don't ask me why that was done, but it was done. And in the middle of all that celebrating, in the middle of all that marching around with timbrels, tambourines, with horns and clapping and everything, in the middle of that, Yeshua makes that statement that he is the one who provides living water. Can you imagine? He stands up in the middle of this great Jewish holiday when everybody's thinking very much about God's dwelling with his people. He says, hey, I'm the one. I'm the one. I'm the Messiah. I will give you living water if you turn to me. Well, that's why it goes on and says, on hearing these words, some people in the crowd said, surely this man must be the prophet. Others said, this is the Messiah. But others said, how can the Messiah come from Galilee up in the north? Because there was no expectation that the Messiah would come from up in the north where the common folk lived. The expectation that when Messiah would come, he would come, from Jerusalem. But Messiah came from the north. And so what happened was people were very confused. How could this man be the Messiah? He's a nobody. He's not famous. He's not who the Messiah is supposed to be. He's not coming riding on a white stallion. He comes riding on the donkey. They were very confused about this, and they responded not the way they should have responded, although many did. So just a couple more verses from Scripture before I close. This is one of my favorite verses in all the Bible. It's in the book of Revelation. Now, it's not the stuff in Revelation that people, freak out reading about, like they're on LSD trips or something like that. This is simple to understand. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the old heaven and the old earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared like a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a voice from the throne in heaven say, see, God's Shekinah is with mankind. God's tabernacling with mankind. That's what it is. And he will live with them. Remember the concept of tabernacling? They will be his people, and he himself will be their God. Revelation 21. This is a great vision that John had of a day when God will come back to earth and dwell with his people. My view of heaven is that it's going to be on earth. I've talked to you many times about this idea of that angels may be not floating around on little puffy white clouds on some Saturday, you're laying outside in the field some summer and you see this nice cloud and maybe you think you see an angel in the cloud. No. The scripture teaches that heaven, when that takes place, will be on earth, and it will be a transformed earth. No pollution, no disease, no war. Don't you look forward to that? And here in Revelation 21, John sees it. Sukkot was always known as a holiday that commemorated God dwelling with his people, right? The 40 years in the wilderness. So John picks up on this theme. He sees this in his vision in Revelation 21. That's going to take place when the New Jerusalem comes. He says, God's tent, God's tabernacle will be with mankind, and he will live with them. And they will be his people, and he himself will be their God. That's called the tripartite promise. You see that reference very often in the Tanakh and the Old Testament and other places. I will be their God, they will be my people, and I will dwell among them. You can see that three-part theme throughout the entire Tanakh. Well, here it's going to happen. And when Messiah returns to this earth to set up his kingdom, there'll be a 1,000-year reign of peace and prosperity for all. I'm looking forward to that. How about you? Now, the only problem is that some people won't buy into this. In fact, Zechariah gives us a hint about this. He says that in the last days, all the nations are going to come against Israel to do battle. I could see that happening. Anti-Semitism in the world is still increasing. And what happened in Germany 60 years ago happened just a little bit. All of a sudden, Germany did the most dastardly thing that could have been done. They wiped out 1/3 of the Jews on the face of the earth. It's modern history. That could happen again. So we have to be alert to these things happening. But Zechariah says, when all the nations of the earth are coming against against Israel to do battle, God's feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which, by the way, is where Yeshua left earth, and he will fight for his people as he did in the day of battle. I'm encouraged. If the world comes against Israel, Messiah is going to be right there, because he's not going to let our people down. And he'll return to the Mount of Olives and set up his kingdom in Jerusalem, I believe, in the temple. Not sure what to do with the Dome of the Rock yet, but I think God can figure that out too. But there's a judgment on the people that don't celebrate Sukkot in the last days. If any of the people on earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord God Almighty, they will have no rain. And the way they are to worship in Jerusalem is to celebrate the feast of what? Tabernacles. So it's good that we're learning about this feast now, so when that day comes, everybody will be ready and know what to do. Yeshua is going to return to establish his long-awaited kingdom, and all people who have been redeemed by his sacrifice will gladly celebrate Sukkot in all its fullness. What a celebration this is going to be in that day coming soon, when all people, Jews and Gentiles, will wave the lulav and the esrog and celebrate Sukkot the way God intended and chant these words: Ana Adonai Hoshiano, Lord, please save us. That day is coming soon. Come back tomorrow night for Sukkot. We're going to actually observe all these customs and be here at 6 o'clock for dinner. I think it's a potluck dinner. I'm not so sure who's organizing that, but I know it's being organized. So if you're interested in bringing some food, talk to somebody who would know what they're talking about, not me. I don't know. And we'll have a great time, and then we'll come inside and we'll go through the ceremony, and we'll even do a little hafakot. Hafakot is we're going to dance around the room. Okay, and then at the end of the week, we've got some other holidays I'll tell you about too that are related to this. But that's it for Sukkot this morning. I hope it's helpful to get some background on it before we actually start to celebrate. And now, if you would stand, we will close our service with a profession of our confidence in God called the Aleinu.